Katharine Birbalsingh, who's been dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher.
She runs the Michaela Community School in a deprived part of North London. The school focuses on discipline and manners.
I want you to be the head teacher of my children's school, Katharine Birbalsingh. You talk my language. Now,
people think that I'm mean, and I'm mean because I'm the strictest headmistress in Britain, and I have rules and I have detentions and things like this. I spend all my time arguing with everybody. I'm arguing with them on Twitter. I'm arguing with them on the press, right? I'm strange that I'm willing to go out and fight every day. Most people don't want to do that.
Imagine a school where you get detention for not having good enough eye contact with your teacher. The corridors are completely silent, and there's no excuses. Michaela's approach to behaviour is certainly infamous, and many schools believe that emulating their behaviour policy will mean they'll be able to get the same grades as Michaela. We'll be discussing if Michaela is too controlling, if they love their students, and if shouting at kids is okay. So often in education we speak about behaviour management, which has very controlling connotations. Instead, in this episode, we're going to discuss whether we think Michaela is a caring school or not. At the end of the episode, we'll play you what an ex-student remembers of behaviour and care at Michaela. The podcast is mainly made up of a conversation between Martha, Jack and I. I'll also introduce you to some influential figures in education, like Tom Bennett, Professor Stephen Ball, and we'll also hear from Katharine Birbalsingh herself, Britain's strictest headmistress. Please don't forget to follow the podcast so you can get updates on this story as it develops. I want to start by asking your memories of care from school.
Can I go first? I was very shy, very scared at school. So there were a few teachers who were just nice to me, like picked up on that. Didn't mind that I got upset a lot when I went to a middle school actually. It doesn't exist anymore. But even into like secondary age education, I would easily get upset if I got something wrong or if I was like struggling like socially or even just for reasons I didn't understand. And there were one or two teachers who were very lovely to me and would like give me a private space, talk me through it, ask me what was going on, but not in a way that was difficult. Yeah, it was good care.
When I think of care, I'm thinking when I was at primary school, there was, I guess you would nowadays call her more like a pastoral lead, but she was the school nurse and she had her own little room, like off from the classrooms. And it just felt like such a safe space for you to go. And there would be kind of medical support there if you fell over in the playground. But I think a lot of what she was doing was just really like care and support emotionally. And it wasn't really framed in those terms, I guess, when you're at primary school. It was interesting to me. I felt like that was quite detached from what was maybe going on in the classroom.
There was one of the teachers, I did feel like she really cared about me and sort of for me. And I look back now, and lots of the care that I do want to try and provide young people with, I don't think she did give me, but she did champion me and she did treat me like an individual. You know, she kind of like, I remember she was Welsh and I remember I could do quite a good Welsh accent when I was that age, and she found that quite funny. It wasn't, you know, just like you're not allowed to talk to a teacher like that. Like I remember picking up her phone at the back of the classroom and pretending to be her when somebody phoned her. And she thought that was brilliant. And she was quite strict actually as well.
Yeah.
She usually would she'd tell people off and things. But we had a real relationship. So I will think of her when I think about care actually. So I want to start by going back to our trip to Michaela, which we all thoroughly enjoyed and was fascinating. And well, maybe Jack felt a little sad after it. But I wanted to ask you guys, where did you see care at Michaela?
Go on. I'm glad you've got one.
So one thing I guess I'm really quite fascinated by is the gratitude section of lunch that happened. So in a way, going back to what I was just saying about making explicit and acknowledging invisible forms of care, I do feel like there was a bit of that within the gratitude statements. Like some of them were saying, oh, thank you to my mum for waking me up in the morning, or thank you to Sir for staying late to correct my homework, or I can't remember specifics exactly,
yeah.
but I think it wasn't necessarily care being given to these students, it was more students acknowledging care that had been given to them. Don't know what you guys think about that.
I agree. I was bothered by how rote their answers were. You know, I heard young people thanking other people, giving their gratitude in the same way that I saw them doing it in the documentary about Michaela. So there's definitely this kind of fallback way of doing it. Also, the kids at my lunch table thanked me for liking Vietnamese food. So I didn't necessarily feel that they were developing their understanding of gratitude in a very deep way. Yeah. But I don't want to take it away from them. They did emphasize that gratitude was important, and I think there is something caring about that.
Next order of business, we need to be working on our appreciations. Make sure that they are precise. Make sure that you practice thoroughly so that you are ready in case you are chosen.
Around their table, they start practicing what they are appreciative for. And at the end of lunch, we give about 5 or so minutes for pupils to stand up and give an appreciation.
Let's hear from Nazli.
I would like to give my appreciation to my mum for always reminding me to complete my homework early every day, so when I do it, I can take all my time to put more care and effort into it. So 2 claps on the count of 2. 1, 2.
There was a lot of care paid to, so like care as an attention to detail. I saw a lot of that. There was a lot of like rigor, and you can say that rigor is a form of carefulness, but is it a form of care? I'm not sure. They would say it probably is, I think. Yeah.
We're really sort of mining the depths of where care was at Michaela, because I think adults and young people don't seem to connect very much, because there's a lot of adults in front of a whole classroom of young people. It's quite hard to see the care there, maybe.
It's hard to see it in a relational or emotional form, isn't it? It's hard to see an example of like someone feeling better because of the actions that another person has done towards them. I didn't see any of that.
It goes back to the definition, right? I mean, I think maybe we'll dwell on this quite a lot in this episode. Katharine says that she's loving towards these students, right? But I think we might disagree as to how you should demonstrate love and how you can make that clear to people. But I think that we can't deny that a lot of attention is paid to students at Michaela. Like some might say are policed or surveyed in what they're doing, but for some that is a form of care, like watching out for someone and looking, like noticing them.
I agree with that. I think that Michaela would say that their approach to care, it would be summarized by a kind of traditional approach to behavior. They see care as being taking a young person and supporting them to behave in a way that they think is a good way to behave and that supports their learning, and that also has kind of what Katharine calls small c conservative values, because she sees that in line with a good thing to be. So if we take care at this school on their terms, I would say that some big examples of the kind of care that they would say they give would be slant. So slant, as you remember, do you want to try it?
I don't know how.
So you have to sit up straight. You have to track the speaker, which would be me in this, and you'd have to never interrupt me. So it's gonna be a very boring podcast. You have to listen. You have to answer the question. So young people sit like this all day long, and we remember from the classrooms that they're all sort of sat up like that, and it does make for a very unusual environment. And critics feel that this is a very kind of controlling approach to schooling, and that there's not a full sort of sense of dignity in this kind of being mandated to sit in a certain way all day long. It's not really something that happens in any other space. I mean, it doesn't really happen in prisons. So it's a very unusual thing to do.
You need to make sure everyone in the classroom is able to learn. That's one of the justifications they have for slant, for this very strict, regimented way of teaching, is that if you let one person get away with not doing that, then it will disrupt the learning of everyone else. So it's a form of maybe communal care.
Yeah, and the philosophy that underpins that you could call no excuses. And no excuses is the approach of Michaela. It was the approach at the Knowledge is Power program in America in the 90s, and they were sort of key people in founding this approach. And that basically means that adults demand a very specific way of young people behaving. And then they sort of punish them for any sort of slight deviation, and maybe they would reward them as well for doing what they want to see. I think it would be interesting for us to list all the things that just come to our heads that are mandated at Michaela. So I've listed one already, which is slant. So I just wonder how long we can go through things that Michaela say, there's no excuses, you have to do it this way.
Okay. Walking in silence through the corridors.
Not gathering in groups of more than 4 in the yard.
Yes. Playing professionally in the yard, because we saw some people who were disciplined for not playing professionally at break time.
Yeah. Learning what you're told to learn. So like in the way that the curriculum is dictated for you, which is a thing we're all used to, but doesn't necessarily need to be the case.
Having perfect uniform.
Yep. I was going to say not just your uniform, but your hair. There's a whole part of the policy about how to have hair.
How to take a well-exposed photo, apparently.
Yeah.
It was really prescribed the way I saw an art lesson, and yeah, the teacher was talking through like, this is how you do it, these are the settings.
Always being on time.
Yes, like if the young people were late by a fraction of a second, then they are going to get disciplined for that. I was going to say how they eat lunch. We saw lunch is incredibly regimented. It's not this kind of space for breathing, and eating and sharing food. It's literally kind of the biggest gap I think we got was maybe 5 minutes to do one activity within the lunch system.
I could barely get my food down.
You are a proponent of no excuses environments. I was wondering if you know of examples of no excuses environments sort of done badly in the UK, or do you think they're sort of just very, very effective when they happen?
No. Absolutely, it can be done very badly. So it has to be in love. That's why I talk a lot about love, because I think people can misunderstand them. So, and also no excuses is a slight exaggeration. So it is definitely no excuses in this school. However, I might make an excuse for someone. So in fact, 2 days ago, there was a girl, her aunt died, her mother rang in, and we agreed that the homework did not need to be done that night. We understood that. So I will make exceptions, but the head of year would have to come to see me to say, I've got this situation and I'd like to ask, could we do X, Y, and Z? And then I will make the decision. I'd say the problem elsewhere is that when all the deputies or all the heads of year are making decisions and it's sort of up to them, different people have different standards. So it's not that I'm so important, it's that I'm the one person who makes the decision, right? So it's the same with haircuts, for instance. We have a certain standard for haircuts. So one of my deputies, he makes the decision on the haircut. So it's one guy for the entire school. Otherwise, there's just different standards, and you need to have consistency.
So here we've heard Katharine speaking about the no excuses approach, and I really appreciate that she's explaining the nuances of that work. And she's saying, there are sometimes excuses. For example, when a relative dies, we let the young people off their homework, maybe for a night. I don't know, maybe it was a little bit more than a night. I really am convinced that this is not good care. This is not a kind of loving act or compassion on the part of Michaela. This is like the bare minimum that we expect from human beings, is that when they have a bereavement of a close family member, that they, there's
Leeway.
And what was I going to use the phrase, like
Recognition?
Yeah, like and there's like reason. This is where like reasonable adjustments are made.
Yeah.
And I worry that the staff at Michaela have been in such a rigid environment for so long that they've forgotten that is how we should be treating each other as human beings. At boot camp, young people are shown exactly how to behave the Michaela way. They're taught, all the things that we listed, how to go down the corridor and stuff like that. They're also taught about the school's values, like stoic values and different kinds of ideas that the school have sort of underpinning their philosophy.
Who did we interview who said they weren't just told that they should be stoical, they were told like what stoicism was?
Tom Bennett speaks about boot camp and how deep the school goes into the kind of philosophy of stoicism. It's not just a kind of surface level thing. And I believe that that's true. And I was going to say that maybe we could conceive of boot camp as kind of caring for the young people, because they are sort of explaining how it is they need to behave. And I think we need to leave it up to the listener to decide whether, if you tell a child how to behave in year 7 and they don't behave like that, for the rest of their time at school, does that entitle you to give them a punishment or not?
Mm-hmm.
You
And
know,
Michaela would say it does, right? It's
Michaela
like, we
is
told
saying-
you the way to behave. We told you the answers. You just haven't done it.
exactly.
I do think it's so complicated when it comes to, in particular, like neurodiversity and special educational needs. Because on the one hand, I'm like, actually, it's really good that they're very kind of basic and explicit about how you should behave right at the outset. Because I think too many schools and too many situations, they just expect people to know how to behave. And there's something kind of class related to that as well, like expecting someone to have a certain like habitus. That's getting too academic, but in the classroom, right? And actually, not everyone knows that automatically. Some people have to really study that and understand how to do it. But then on the other hand, it's like continuing that no excuse environment throughout school, despite what goes on in a young person's life, despite how they think, like what might change for them or how they develop. I think that is completely, like, it's not an inclusive approach. So yeah, I'm really conflicted about it, to be honest.
At Michaela, everything is about consistency. Have a listen to this clip where the previous deputy head describes how the consistency impacts young people.
It's Aristotle. It's your actions become your habits become your character is who you are. That's what we're always trying to do. We're always trying to develop our pupils' characters and to try to turn them into these amazing young citizens.
It's interesting they do it through habit forming. They're very into habit, aren't they? And they talk about like Aristotle and how he was all about the fact that you learn through something becoming habitual. For me, like habit is like a lack of conscious awareness of what you're doing. So it becomes a habit when you stop thinking about it. And I think that's a problem. Like, I think if the form of care is like through making things habitual, then you're also saying that it's caring to make young people unaware of what they're doing. Like, isn't it better that they would choose?
That's interesting. And my reading of Aristotle is that you still have to be choosing. It's funny that you pick that up, actually, that you still have to be intentional about ethical practice. For example, I don't think Aristotle suggests that by just accidentally giving to charity because you're just used to it, not because you actually understand what that means to be generous and to share and stuff like that. He doesn't see that necessarily as ethical, though Michaela often use Aristotle as the kind of absolute answer to this practice is the right thing to do. But Katharine Birbalsingh speaks a lot about original sin. I mean, she doesn't speak about it so much anymore, but she did go through a big phase of speaking about it. And she uses this concept from like a non-religious perspective. But what she's saying here is that human beings ultimately need correcting. And I think that's probably what's different to a more progressive educator who sees young people as ultimately good.
Isn't it inherent to education that you think something needs to be taken, put through a process and come out the other end a bit different?
That's a really good question. I think you can see education as the development of a life that has no fixed outcome. So, like, yes, you want to see a difference, or it's inevitable that there'll be a difference in a young person from when they start school and end school. But what that difference is, for some people, doesn't need to be understood beforehand, and you might understand that it's different for every young person as well.
Diane Ray is a professor at Cambridge University. Her work focuses on social justice and education.
I hate this view that there's a lack in these children, their families and their communities. You know, there's almost a missionary zeal in schools like Michaela. It's about civilizing the masses, making them into respectable white middle-class individuals rather than seeing and valuing the richness of their communities. And you should be enabling students to become the best version of themselves rather than attempting to change them into a different type of person that's viewed as superior to the person they are.
Yeah, so how do you respond to Diane and Michaela on this subject?
I think Diane's completely right. I'm 100% on that page. I think this harks back to the origins of mass schooling, which was to basically like control and contain and civilize these masses of young people who were kind of roaming the streets and causing trouble. So it had like this really correctional function, I think. And I think that's what Michaela are quite openly trying to do. I mean, they're doing it in a way which looks and feels a little bit different. I don't think, but they basically, it's the same idea of like, if we just leave these young people to it, they're gonna go and do really bad stuff. So we've got to get them in and get them in line.
I think as well, Diane Ray's specific angle is about working class children, and she kind of also talks about people from racialized backgrounds as well. But I think there definitely seems to be a lack of value ascribed to working class culture in Michaela's approach. We're going to get into that more in other episodes, but I think in terms of care and kind of emotional support specifically, you could definitely see how someone from a culture that's not really represented in the teaching at Michaela could feel maybe alienated or feel a lack of care and support in that environment.
Yeah, Katharine would respond to that the approach at Michaela is wrapped in love.
Can I just say a quick thing? Like, I think the invocation of love is really strategic, because it's basically the most powerful sort of emotion, isn't it? Or it's got, at least that's how we recognize it. It's like, oh wow, then it can't be a bad thing, you know? And I think it's a careful choice.
So in this clip, Katharine has come back to the idea that love in education is about consistency.
You know, I think consistency is everything to a child. I think all the consistency, so behavior systems, often in schools, you'll find each teacher has his own behavior system. But I think it's the role of the leaders in the school to enable everybody to have the same behavior system. Because when it's merits and demerits or points or whatever it is, if you have different systems in different classrooms, your more disadvantaged children, your special needs kids, they suffer, because it's really difficult to keep all of that in your head while also trying to learn all this new stuff. The more consistency there is throughout the classrooms, you know, you'll see our classrooms look exactly the same. The desks are always in rows. The teacher's always using a visualizer. The books are always the same. They always count them out in the same fashion. They're always being asked to slant. All of these routines help to support your weakest kids. And I think those are the ones who suffer when you don't have that. So, you know, coming back to the love point, I would say that all the systems we've got here are there to help those children meet high expectations. And so by the time they leave, as I was saying, it's then just part of who they are, and they can make a real success of themselves.
I agree with her that consistency can be a supportive tool, and chaos is probably not going to be a very supportive, caring space. But it's not enough to say that being consistent is to love. You have to question, what is it that we're doing consistently, and is that thing loving? So this consistency that Michaela bring is really underpinned by their no excuses approach, which we referenced earlier. So if you arrive at Michaela, as I say, a second after the bell, then you go to detention.
But the thing is, you were, if you don't mind me saying, you were a couple of minutes late to this.
Yes. No. Well, I'll tell you why. I thought I have to put on some makeup because I'm going to be on, you know, and I thought either I'm going to be 2 minutes late or and look good, or I'm going to be on time, and I chose to look good.
You would not let one of your pupils say that as an excuse.
I knew you'd forgive. Yes, well, I knew you'd forgive me. But yes, it depends. I suppose it depends on how what you think you're playing with. You know, like what I mean is you're making a decision, aren't you? And I knew you'd forgive me, and you did.
Yes.
So
yes, I have forgiven you.
So she was late to this interview, but she doesn't let her kids be late to school. Is that a problem, or is that just different age groups? We expect different things.
I actually think different age groups. I think some things are okay in schools. You have to exaggerate some things, and if they want to exaggerate the importance of being on time, then it's fine.
I do also think, I mean, I broadly agree, but I do think role modeling is important. Delivery and the way of doing things is like as important as the content of what you're doing. And I think it's just being careful about that, because that sort of stuff is ingested by students kind of implicitly.
So Tom Bennett, the behaviour czar to the government, who we've referenced throughout the series, would definitely agree with you here, Jack.
Yay, me and Tom.
So let's listen to that.
It's a bit like zero tolerance. I'm not a fan of the no excuses mantra, because you used to get a lot of schools saying, "Oh, we're zero tolerance," and I think quite rightly a lot of people would say, "Hang on, that sounds a bit draconian. That sounds a wee bit too much." I mean, surely there are some excuses. And you'll say to someone like Katharine or anybody that runs a school with very, very high standards, and you'll say, "So would you give a detention to a kid who doesn't hand in their homework because they've been hit by a bus or something?" And they would go, "Well, obviously not." And I say, "Well, okay, so you're not zero tolerance then. You do have accommodations." And also, when you look at these schools, and believe me, Michaela's been scrutinised for this, that they do make reasonable accommodations as is legally prescribed for children with, for example, special educational needs.
So where I want to just make it clear that me and Tom are not quite aligned is the detention bit. So like, I don't think it's a problem for Katharine to say, "You must be on time." And then for her to say as an adult, "It's, look, don't worry that I wasn't exactly on time." It feels hypocritical, but there's lots of things about the way that adults are different from young people in schools. But I completely disagree with the handing out of a detention. And I also disagree with not asking the child why they're late. If you ask them and they have a good reason, then you don't punish them. I don't agree with the punishment. If the consequence was come back and just finish off the work that you missed when you were late for the lesson, fine. But not if there's a good reason for it.
Well, thank you for clarifying where you and Tom are different.
I just had to,
yeah. And I think that does clarify your understanding a lot more. However, there are more severe examples of kind of the no excuses approach at Michaela.
I was by the reception and I heard, I think there was possibly a kid who had misbehaved and he was being screamed at. Does that work? Does that technique work?
Yeah, I mean, I presume you'll have noticed it was short.
Very short.
Yeah.
About 2 minutes.
What's that?
About 2-3 minutes.
Right.
Well, up to 5.
I'd say that's longer than usual. We tend to do very short kind of and then because that just makes them go whoop, and then and then you talk to them about how disappointed you are and so on. It's a technique, and which I'd say works well with kids.
Oh, okay. And the teachers, the parents, are they aware of that?
Yep. Before they sign up, I say to them, "We will shout." But I should say, the shouting that you heard.
Yes.
Will have been, that might happen once a day. It's not something that's happening constantly. When kids arrive in the first few weeks in year 7, there's much more shouting then to get them into line. But then once they're in line, then you don't have to do anything because they're well trained and they know what they need to do.
Would you agree? I'm not trying to be provocative here, but what about the idea of caning? So one of my relatives was caned at school. Mm-hmm. I don't think he changed. Do you agree with that, or?
Well, you have no idea what he would have been like had he not been caned. I mean, you don't. You never have a counterfactual. But I don't believe caning is necessary. Okay. All you need is a strict environment that where children can choose, and then they can get the detention or not. It's up to them.
What's your response to this?
I would say on that clip specifically and the point around caning as well, I just think not denouncing violence against children when given the opportunity and being at all woolly about that is just actually kind of unacceptable, particularly given I would say the consensus that we've reached in education and parenting styles today. So that's somewhere where I think she has fallen short.
They've created a model, and whether they wanted it or not, it's kind of been exported to other contexts. And I think the concept of no excuses, whether that's in America in the schools that influenced Michaela, or if it's in schools like Mossbourne, and we all know about the controversies there, these instances of reports of incredibly harmful behavior management, kids being screamed at, demeaned, surrounded by adults, all this stuff. And also that school in Great Yarmouth that Barry Smith went on to lead, where he got loads of complaints about how strict his approach was. Michaela have somehow done it in a way that on their terms seems to work, but lots of schools don't, and then have to resort to really horrible methods and probably a lot more shouting. Yeah. I also want to say, just because it's smooth at Michaela, just because it looks like it's working, it doesn't mean it's not harmful. It can be creating even more harm, just in a kind of quieter, more insidious, more kind of neoliberal way.
Yeah, and you have to think, if you're in such a controlled environment, these students are in such a controlled environment all day, then what happens when they leave that environment? Like, do they have to let off steam in some other way that's potentially violent in their own kind of communities or families?
I agree. I think that this reporter, the interviewer, has heard shouting at a young person. He says for between 2 and 5 minutes. If you listen to it carefully, he says between 2 and 5 minutes. Now, as you say, Katharine doesn't sort of quickly denounce that. She sort of says it's, it does happen and things like this. I think that shouting at a young person, modeling that that's how we use our power as adults, I think that's wrong. And I don't think it's commonplace in schools anymore. One thing I worry about here is that we don't hear that spoken about by Michaela a lot. They're not very proud of that part of themselves. And it was a very difficult journey to try and find a podcast where she does reference it.
You mean they're not very proud that they are shouty when they need to be, kind of thing?
Yeah, they don't talk about it a lot. And it makes me, but when she was directly asked about it, she said, yes, we do that. It makes me wonder what else is going on there.
In my experience of teaching, I've shouted, and sometimes that's because I've been in a really stressful environment. Sometimes it's because I have to enforce safety. Like, I've had young people in really unsafe situations, and I'm very happy to shout if I need to. And sometimes it's just been genuinely that I have got angry, and then I've done some repair work afterwards, and I've apologized if I need to for the way that I communicated when I was really upset. So I think it does happen, and it's not necessarily a terrible thing. But the difference is that if you're shouting at someone for 2 to 5 minutes, as an adult, you should be able to regulate your emotions in 30 seconds, no more, 20, 10 maybe. If you're doing that, then you're choosing to shout, and you're choosing to, or you're intimidating someone.
Yeah, and that kind of hierarchical, extremely hierarchical approach makes me think of kind of inmates and officers shouting at them and belittling them. And I have worked with young people in mainstream secondary schools who describe their schooling experience as prison. That's what they say it's like. And they put that down a lot to the level of punishment and control.
Yeah.
And that was in schools that didn't use no excuses environment. So I just wonder how much people do feel in those environments that it is like going to a prison. And that's horrible. Your whole adolescence being in a prison, I think that is a scandal that young people would feel like that every single day. If I felt like that every single day of my life, it would be a horrific life to live. I say I'm not saying that no excuses doesn't work to do certain things. It clearly gets these young people to make huge amounts of knowledge progress in the classroom because they're very focused. But I think it's teaching these young people that the world is a very binary, black and white place. And I don't think that's what life is like. I think it's a lot richer than that. And I think the no excuses approach says that the world is more simple than it is. Care ethicist Nell Noddings, who I have quite a... Okay, what am I going to say about her? I love her, yeah. Yeah, well, there you go. You said it before.
Now, what do you admire about her?
I admire that she goes to a depth in her work, and I connected with it. I don't know. It's hard to describe. It made me kind of cry, and it's an academic piece of writing. Okay. And she was a teacher. Right. So I think she really understands education and how we care in education in a really deep way. Right. And she says that you shouldn't really need punishment when you're working with young people if you're caring for them. But she does think that crucially we need authentic dialogue with young people. And by that, she means that the young people feel safe to be themselves and that there's a real kind of human interaction, in summary. We could talk about a lot what an authentic dialogue would be, but that's how I'd summarize it. I know this from my own experience in schools. When I've cared for young people the best, that's when we really kind of see each other on a human level. There's a very bounded relationship. They know why I'm in their lives. But it doesn't mean that we don't see each other as real human beings, and we have our personalities that shine through and things like that. My worry is that those authentic relationships are harder to have in an environment where the young people's time is so completely full. We were there and we saw that young people do things the whole day. They don't have time for anything. They're marched here, marched there in silence. When are you getting to really connect with these young people as individuals, and when are you going to get to see them and give them that targeted care? I asked Katharine about this, actually.
If you have 4 classes of history in Year 8, all 4 classes are being taught in a similar kind of way, and they're accessing a similar standard of education. But it doesn't mean that they're all going to think in exactly the same way about the knowledge that they're being given, because they're all individuals. And in fact, I would even argue that it's when you give them that safe environment of consistency that they're all the more likely to be even more creative and more independently minded, because they're not worrying about what so-and-so going to say about me. What is someone going to laugh? I'm actually just worried about getting this right. And so, oh my goodness, I'm just not going to put my hand up, or I'm not really thinking about it because there's so much noise in the classroom, I can't think. Or because there's all these differences between my classrooms and I'm a bit special needs, I can't actually listen. I can't focus enough to be able to take on board what I need from this classroom.
She keeps coming back to consistency. That seems to be her answer to everything.
I guess I question how possible it is to have a real in-depth relationship with every member of your class or every member of your year group. And I do worry a little bit that maybe inequity or inequality can creep in there, because it tends to be certain types of students, either those that need more support or that are just louder, kind of. Often it is when someone's having a problem, they may actually gain more access to teachers and have a closer relationship with them through that. Or on the other hand, they're performing very well and they get attention that way. I guess the thing about Michaela, what they're doing differently is by having this consistency, it does remove that way that inequity can creep in.
But I don't think you can solve it by just being consistent, because I don't think anyone is completely consistent. And I don't think consistency is what diverse groups of young people need either. Like, so there isn't an easy solution. The best that we can come up with is try to be equitable, like as in don't treat everyone exactly the same, but try and give people the same level of fairness. And that often looks like inconsistency. But if you explain it to everyone as, well, this person needs a bit more of this and this person needs a bit more of that.
Do you ever worry that they're too acceptant or they're too compliant, or could this practice ever tip over into that?
No, they're children. I mean, it's funny because when you ask these questions, they are inner city children. There's no way we can make them all exactly the same and do like I'm not a magician. I mean, sometimes they go and see their tutor after school to say, I'm worried about this or that, and they speak to their head of year. Sometimes we notice that things aren't right in the yard, and then the head of year might say, is everything all right here? And so on, I mean, they're kids, they're normal, they're human.
Katharine says that you can't dull their flame. She says that these are inner city kids that are, have got full of life. But I didn't feel that life when I was at the school. One of my worries about this is that if we're not supporting young people to be themselves and be individual, then how are they developing their understanding of what they care about? So many young people see caring for our planet as the most urgent issue for them. We've seen this in the walkouts from schools for the last few years from young people, which I find very inspiring. In early 2025, Katharine Birbalsingh spoke to Winston Marshall on his podcast, and she was speaking about teaching on climate change in schools.
The future of the country it's our children. What else is the future of the country? And if the children are being taught to hate their country, if the children are being taught that climate change is the most destructive thing that, known to man, and I don't really have an opinion on climate change, so I have no idea. I'm not saying it isn't. Maybe it is. I have no idea.
It isn't. But anyway, that's for another day.
I will watch some of your podcasts with people who talk about climate change. I don't know. So I'm not saying, I'm just saying that this is what schools teach. Schools teach about climate change as the biggest issue for them, for the country, for the world.
I'm reminded of Phil Beadle talking about how these knowledge-rich people who are obsessed with knowledge don't have much themselves. I mean, there's a petty thing to say, but I think the idea that she would prevaricate around this issue and not acknowledge the severity of climate change is really undermines her authority. I know there are people who still deny it, but I just think is really out there to be.
I think again, it's just an example of an abdication of responsibility. Ultimately, it's I think, in terms of her general worldview and things that she values, like you say, like knowledge and scientific fact and investing in, filling young people's vessels, or however we want to frame it. Surely you would think that this is an important thing to be teaching young people. I don't know. I mean, it just feels like it's kind of a not. Yeah, maybe it's appeasing certain people that she's speaking to in podcasts, and it's not actually aligned with the rest of her worldview.
My worry about it is that we have a genuine need for our world to be fixed. We have an urgent problem with the climate, and I think our education system, as every other institution in society, should be mindful of supporting young people to feel empowered to do something about that, at least some of them to do something about that. Stephen Bull is Emeritus Professor at UCL. His work was very formative for me, so I was very excited when he said he would take part.
As I would see it, the key problems addressing our society and young people are two forms of decay, if you like, social decay, decline of community, social relationships, and environmental decay. The planet, we're moving towards the possible extinction of our species, global warming and all its accoutrements, if you like. And if we're going to address those things, then education, I think, must necessarily be part of that. And at the moment, it's not. What we need are young people who are flexible, adaptable, creative, inventive, sympathetic, empathetic, tolerant, able to think differently about our relation to nature.
At Michaela, I think staff there would say, well, our young people have lots of responsibility to care for their community. You know, for example, there were tour guides and librarians. And when you go to school, all these young people have got like these badges down their lapels, and they look a little bit like admirals or like sort of military, because they've got so many different awards down their tops. And we asked our tour guides, you know, how do you become a tour guide, you know? And she said, the best are skimmed off the top. So a group of people apply, and then the best is selected. I don't think that is really care. I don't think that's young people understanding how to look after each other, because that's something we all need to be engaged with and we all need to be doing. It's not like this prize to be won. I think this is the young people winning a competition and sort of having an added responsibility at school that kind of adorns their blazer. It's a reward.
I would say that's definitely not unique to Michaela, though. That feels like that's just such a kind of integral part to so many schools. And I mean, I remember being the eco monitor for my form, sports captain, all of these things. It's like, I think this is really embedded in the British education system in general. So it's not something we should necessarily call out Michaela for, although maybe they do it in a slightly more extreme way.
I agree that it's not unique to Michaela, but we also have heard earlier that the head teacher there isn't necessarily convinced by climate change. So it seems like a really bad combination to me.
Yeah, probably you wouldn't have eco rep the same way.
I think we'd all agree that we are in the middle of a mental health crisis in the UK. Everyone knows somebody who is suffering, and particularly working in schools, I have multiple young people in a small school who are on very, very long waiting lists and are not getting the support they need, like basic care that they need. Therefore, I think it is the responsibility of schools to have some kind of approach to mental health. I mean, there are also things that I know you can do. There are little lessons in class that you don't have to be an expert to support somebody to understand how they feel and their emotional literacy.
And they're free, those little measures, like those little extra lessons or those little 5 minute or 1 minute little bits of being human as a teacher in a classroom that's not costing you anything.
Yeah. Where does sort of feelings run through the practice at Michaela?
Well, I would argue that feelings that are just left to go crazy are not necessarily helpful for any of us, you know, that... I
agree.
You know, I think children can sometimes be very dramatic about things, that they need to learn how to control themselves when they're feeling very angry and so on. In Year 7, when they first arrive, we talk about the little monster inside us, and you want to not have a monster moment and just go mad at things. And very quickly they learn how to not have monster moments, which I think is a good thing, because otherwise you end up at work when you're 25 and your boss says something you don't like and you march out because you're so angry. These are emotions that we need to learn how to control, really. But that doesn't mean we don't have feelings. People who don't explode at each other doesn't mean they don't feel stuff. Of course they do. They feel happy and sad and excited and a bit bored sometimes, and you saw it in your guides. They rolled their eyes at the year sevens. Yeah. Those are their feelings. But what they didn't do was insult the year sevens and be, unkind about the year sevens. And I think I'd say too much in 2025 that we sort of admire sometimes, influencers and people out there. We admire people who are very exaggerated in their expression of what they think this is what everyone should be, listening to. I've been wronged in this way. A child gets a detention. How dare you? It's not, etc. One thing that we teach them when they come in year 7 is that, come on, you've got a detention. It's not the end of the world. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in jail and he's all right. You've got a 30-minute detention. It's not the end of the world. And they learn to accept that. And they learn to think, oh, well, actually, sometimes things don't go your way, but it's okay. And I think these are great skills to have in life.
I am concerned that she misses the whole kind of field of psychology. We know now that we need emotional literacy skills, and those are things that can be grown. And I don't think Michaela are geared towards supporting young people with their emotions.
Unless those emotions are a sense of national pride. And, when the teacher told someone to really pound their heart harder and show with more vigor that they were reading this poem Ozymandias at lunchtime or something. They're fine with that. These feelings of orientated towards the ethos and the values that they want to have are okay. But
well, I think it comes back to the way that Michaela have got a very specific idea of what it is to be a good person. So gratitude and pride are feelings that they rate. Whereas anger, which I think is a crucial feeling that tells us how we are doing, tells us where we're at in a social situation, that's something that they don't think, they don't want, they don't like, and they don't educate around.
Yeah. I wonder if vulnerability, what side that goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nuances between feelings, they're not interested in those. The nuance between happiness and joy, for example, I think that's a really great thing for young people to understand and learn about, because it's a really important part of life. On a personal note, I know that pushing down those feelings doesn't work, right? I'm a human being and I've tried it. I tried not feeling things, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit biased. I don't think that makes for a happy adult, makes for a happy life.
They could say, but we're not set up for that. We don't have the resources to provide for that. And there is validity to that argument. A lot of schools do not have enough money to provide adequate counselling to hear all the feelings or to respond to all the feelings that their young people have. I just think the answer is the money needs to go. They need more money. I don't think the answer is to drop that.
But she also isn't asking for that money. She doesn't agree with that approach. So
yeah.
An expert on this is Kadra Abdenasser. She is the Associate Director for Policy at the Centre for Mental Health. And I found her work when I was reading her Behaviour and Mental Health in Schools report that she wrote. We discussed highly punitive schools in general. So she's not commenting here specifically about Michaela, but she is commenting on kind of the no excuses approach to education.
I guess what we've been seeing is this tendency maybe to default to behaviorist methods, because they can offer quick fixes in that context. And while they might sort of appear to work in the short term, so for example, some evidence shows that it helps reduce short-term exclusions, they don't really work to address the root causes of the issues that pupils are struggling with, so poverty, mental health problems, or undiagnosed special educational needs. And I think they can actually exacerbate a lot of those problems for many groups. And then I guess I sort of mentioned this divide between behaviorist approaches and trauma-informed approaches and restorative approaches too, which can sometimes also be a bit of a false binary in our opinion. So for example, if we look at isolation booths, we know that it's really clear to see that children with existing mental health difficulties or special needs being placed in an isolation room isn't just unpleasant, but it's also like deeply distressing for them. And it can really reinforce feelings of like rejection and shame. So we heard so many concerning examples through our inquiry, shocking ones. Actually, like some of it wasn't even about responding to behavior. Worryingly, we did hear about some examples where children were being punished for performance-related matters. So there was an example where if you didn't achieve like 7 out of 10 in a spelling test, then you would be punished for that. And that's not, why are we applying behavior responses to problems like that? And then, receiving detentions because a school-issued tablet wasn't charged to 98%, or if you forgot your water bottle. For us, this isn't also an issue that just affects children and pupils themselves, but also their families and teachers as well. So we also heard from teachers that how applying these methods impacted them, following these really rigid punitive systems didn't feel good for them. And it also impacted their own well-being. And sometimes they were sort of like forced to act against their own instincts and their own judgments because these were like the blanket rules that were being applied in schools.
What are your initial responses to her interview?
I really feel like it kind of, I guess, debunks or almost like flies in the face of this idea that permeates a lot of Michaela's thinking, that consistency equals safety. Like, I feel like what we've heard from Kadra is that actually Michaela's methods could be potentially making people feel consistently unsafe and causing anxiety through that. It really, for me, debunks this premise that just by being consistent in your approach, you can actually create a sense of safety.
Yeah, I think she talks a lot. Well, she brings to mind fear, as we were saying about the emotions that Michaela kind of allow and don't allow. Like, I think people do make mistakes. So even if you're on board with a system of behavior, and even if you've been told what the right thing to do is, the constant fear that you might just slip up, or you might be misjudged by a teacher who thinks that you've done something on purpose when you haven't, or whatever, that must be horrible.
Yeah, I have in my head some listeners feeling that this part of our conversation and Kadra's interview is a bit extreme. They'll think, I went to school, I got told off plenty of the time and I was fine. It wasn't a big deal. However, I speak to a lot of people of, like, say, my parents' generation who say school was absolutely horrific. It was a horrible time of my life and I still feel the effects now. I think my mum would probably agree with that, as she experienced bullying at school.
Yeah.
I think these things are powerful and they do affect you for a long time. And really key to Michaela is that I think it's different. I don't think that their level of control is the same as most people experienced at school. Most people didn't experience having to sit in the same way every single day. They had breathers. So yes, you go into somebody's class and they tell you off and it's a little bit scary, but then you go into the next class and you've got the cool teacher for an hour, and then you change and change and change and you experience different things through the day. But Michaela, as Katharine says, is completely consistent. Do I think the kids are scared all day long? I'm not sure about that. I think some are. I don't think they all are, because I think that Michaela are successful at what they say they do, which is change young people. I think young people give up, and I think young people just settle into sitting up straight all day. But I don't think that's caring. I don't think that's making young people able to become adults who understand the nuances of life and understand how to sort of support each other and build a better world.
We'll end with the voice of a former Michaela student reflecting on this episode's theme. Their anonymity has been respected, and their words are brought to life by an actor. Across the series, they share both positive and negative memories of school. We approached several Michaela graduates, but only one agreed to take part in an interview. Their account is not presented as representative of all Michaela young people.
There were still some good times, and I often think about those instead now. I just focused on how I was able to learn in a peaceful environment, students were friendly, and there was no bullying at all. I think what made it easier to bond with people is that everyone was going through the same experience at the same time. On bad days, it was common to open up to your friends and depend on them for some support and encouragement. The silent corridors were also great. It allowed us to transfer between lessons in just under a couple of minutes. It also enhanced that distraction-free zone that the school was trying to create. We got the whole lesson period to learn, which was very useful, and I am grateful for that kind of space we had. The supervised toilet breaks were for the lower school. There would be a queue outside and the pupils would line up with the teacher. Depending on the number of cubicles available, the teacher would allow each pupil in, giving them a maximum of 2 minutes each to ensure everybody could go efficiently before the end of the break period. There were no distractions in the toilet, such as mirrors, and the toilets would be left extremely clean, exactly as we found them to begin with. In the sixth form, alongside completely free lunch periods to do what we wanted, our toilet breaks were also unsupervised. We had sixth form toilets with codes on them and we could go by ourselves during breaks. We had a certain level of freedom in the sixth form in comparison to the lower school, which was nice. Some children are happy. Not every child finds the school unbearable. However, they form a very small minority, and generally in earlier year groups like Year 7 and Year 8. It felt like you had to be perfect every day, even on your bad days. It always felt like there was a greater emphasis on negative reinforcement. Of course, there were awards, events and merits given out for good behaviour, but it felt like punishment was always prioritised more. Sixth formers sit detentions with the younger year groups as early as Year 7. It was very uncomfortable for students, considering 17 and 18-year-olds are practically adults. One thing I will say about detentions is that some of the reasons they were given out weren't always valid, especially for the simplest of things. It made detentions meaningless in higher year groups and it kind of defeated the purpose of them. People didn't really care anymore as it became so common. If I hadn't taken the advice we were given to consider universities outside of London, I would not have fulfilled my potential of attending a reputable university. In my first year, I was told by a lot of my peers that I was very different from others that they had met, and they thought it was largely because of the school I went to. I noticed that as well. I was different. I was not very relaxed at the very start because I was still my school self. I was still in the same habits, and it took a few weeks to break them and be normal like everyone else. I was so surprised that in our first lecture, there was so much emphasis placed on well-being and mental health. I never understood how important it was before then. Those topics were barely spoken about at Michaela. They would be spoken about very vaguely and normally in the context of something else like sleep or device usage. If you were suffering from school-related stress, they would always blame it on your parents for giving their children a device. Their theory was that children only suffer mentally because they search up their symptoms and align it to a condition. That wasn't the case for many. Lots of children would avoid opening up about their problems because they thought it wouldn't even make a difference. The teachers would then just assume that the child was slacking or letting their standards drop. Things that are completely human-like, being extremely tired after a long day, were just excuses to Michaela. Every year, as the school's results got better, the rules get harsher and harsher.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Graded. Join us next time when we will be speaking about the culture at Michaela. We'll be focusing on British values and what multiculturalism means in education. Please share this episode with a friend so we can continue this conversation. It really helps the podcast.